Every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, the old man arrived at the same bus stop. Same gray coat, same worn shoes, same small bench near the road. Rain, snow, summer heat. It never mattered. He always came. At first, people barely noticed him. Cities are full of lonely old men nobody asks about. But slowly, the neighborhood began recognizing him because, unlike ordinary passengers, the old man never boarded any bus. He only watched, silently, carefully, as if searching every passing face for someone important. Then, at sunset, he quietly left again, every single day, for years. The younger people near the area began whispering eventually. Maybe he's crazy. Maybe he forgot where he lives. Maybe he's waiting for someone dead already. Cruel laughter followed sometimes, but the old man never reacted, never argued, only continued waiting beside the road like his entire life depended on it. One cold autumn evening, a university student named Jasur missed his bus after classes ended late. Frustrated, he sat beside the old man quietly while waiting for the next bus. At first, neither spoke. Only traffic noise filled the darkening street. Then, suddenly, Jasur noticed something strange. The old man held a tiny, faded photograph carefully inside trembling hands. A little girl smiling brightly beside balloons, maybe 6 years old. Curious, Jasur softly asked, "Is that your granddaughter?" The old man looked down at the photo silently, and for one painful second, his eyes filled with unbearable sadness. Then, quietly, answered, "My daughter." Jasur immediately felt awkward, because the girl in the picture looked far too young compared to the old man's age now. "How old is she now?" he asked carefully. Long silence followed. Then softly, almost like confession, the old man whispered, "She disappeared 20 years ago." The street suddenly felt colder somehow. Cars passing, people moving. Meanwhile, one lonely father carried 20 years of grief beside a bus stop. Jasur looked toward him carefully. What happened? The old man stared at the road silently for several seconds, then slowly began speaking. Her name was Lalo, bright child, always laughing, always talking, the kind of daughter filling homes with life. And every morning before school, she kissed his cheek at this exact bus stop before boarding the school bus. Same bench, same road, same place. Then, one rainy afternoon, she never came home. Police searched everywhere. Schools, hospitals, relatives. Nothing. No answers, no goodbye. Only disappearance. 20 years of silence afterward. Jasur's chest tightened emotionally hearing it, because suddenly, the old man sitting beside him no longer looked strange. He looked broken. The old man carefully touched the faded photo again, then quietly whispered, "I kept thinking, maybe one day she'll return here looking for me." Tears instantly filled Jasur's eyes, because suddenly he realized something devastating. This old man wasn't waiting for buses, he was waiting for hope to come home. Night slowly covered the city afterward, and eventually, Jasur's bus arrived. Before leaving, he softly asked, "What's your name?" The old man smiled sadly. "Otebek." Then quietly added, "Lalo used to say no matter where life takes us, we should always meet here again." Jasur stepped onto the bus emotionally shaken, and through the window, he watched Otebek remain alone on the bench, staring into passing headlights, still waiting for the daughter the world already told him to stop believing in. 20 years earlier, the city looked very different. Smaller streets, older buses, children still playing outside until sunset safely. And every morning, little Layla waited beside the same bus stop, holding her father's hand proudly. She was only 6 years old, bright smile, tiny braids, always carrying too many questions inside her small head. Meanwhile, Odebek adored her completely. Not quietly, openly. The entire neighborhood knew. He worked long, exhausting hours repairing radios and televisions inside a tiny workshop. But every evening, he returned home carrying tiny gifts for Laylo anyway. Candy, hair ribbons, cheap balloons, small things. Because fathers who love daughters deeply never stop noticing little joys. Laylo's mother died shortly after childbirth years earlier, so from the beginning it was only the two of them, and somehow that made their bond even stronger. Every morning before school, Laylo kissed Odebek's cheek and promised the same thing. "I'll come back fast, Dad." Always smiling afterward, always returning. Until the rainy Thursday changing everything forever. That morning, the sky already looked dark. Heavy clouds, cold wind. And strangely, Laylo seemed quieter than usual. While waiting near the bus stop, she suddenly asked something unexpected. "Dad, if someone gets lost, how do they find home again?" Odebek laughed softly at first, thinking it was only another child's question. Good people always help children return home. Laylo nodded slowly, but somehow her tiny face still looked worried. Before boarding the school bus, she hugged Odebek tighter than normal, very tightly, then softly whispered, "Don't forget me." Those words haunted Odebek for the next 20 years, because deep down, he still wondered whether somehow his daughter already felt danger coming. That afternoon, rain flooded the streets heavily. Schools closed early. Parents rushed toward bus stops carrying umbrellas desperately. Odebek arrived soaked completely, heart already nervous strangely. Children slowly exited buses one by one afterward, laughing, running home, but Laylo never appeared. At first, Odebek assumed confusion happened. Maybe another bus, maybe delayed, maybe teacher mistake. Minutes passed, then hours. Panic slowly became terror. Teachers searched classrooms, drivers checked buses again. Police arrived. Nothing. No child, no backpack, no explanation. Only silence swallowing the city. Days turned into weeks afterward. Search posters covered walls everywhere. Tiny, smiling Laylo staring from every street corner. Television announcements, police investigations, volunteers searching forests and rivers. Still, nothing. And slowly, the world moved on without answers. But Odebek never did. Because parents of missing children live differently afterward. They never truly sleep peacefully again, never stop listening for footsteps, never stop imagining impossible reunions. One winter evening, months after the disappearance, police finally visited Odebek quietly. Serious faces, soft voices. And the moment he saw them, his heart collapsed immediately. Because deep down, parents always know when hope is dying. The officer carefully sat beside him, then gently explained, "After all this time, it may be healthier to accept she's probably gone." Odebek stared silently at the floor. No crying, no shouting, only emptiness. Then finally, he whispered something terrifyingly calm. "If my daughter was alive, she would come back to the bus stop first." That sentence stayed with the officer forever afterward, because suddenly he realized this grieving father had built his entire remaining life around one impossible hope, that somewhere one lost little girl still remembered where home was. Years continued passing, and still, every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, Odebek returned to the bus stop. The city changed around him slowly. New buildings, new buses, new people, but the old man remained the same, still holding Lilo's faded photograph carefully, still searching passing faces, still waiting for impossible footsteps. Most people stopped noticing him eventually, except Jasur. After hearing Odebek's story that cold autumn evening, he could not forget it. Something about the old man's lonely hope stayed inside him painfully. So, sometimes, after university classes, Jasur returned to the bus stop, bringing tea quietly. At first, Odebek barely spoke, but slowly the two strangers formed an unusual friendship, one built from grief and listening. One rainy afternoon, while sitting together beneath the old bus shelter, Jasur suddenly asked softly, "Did the police ever suspect anyone?" Odebek's eyes darkened immediately. Long silence. Years continued passing, and still, every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, Odebek returned to the bus stop. The city changed around him slowly. New buildings, new buses, new people, but the old man remained the same, still holding Lilo's faded photograph carefully, still searching passing faces, still waiting for impossible footsteps. Most people stopped noticing him eventually, except Jasur. After hearing Odebek's story that cold autumn evening, he could not forget it. Something about the old man's lonely hope stayed inside him painfully. So, sometimes, after university classes, Jasur returned to the bus stop, bringing tea quietly. At first, Odebek barely spoke, but slowly the two strangers formed an unusual friendship, one built from grief and listening. One rainy afternoon, while sitting together beneath the old bus shelter, Jasur suddenly asked softly, "Did the police ever suspect anyone?" Odebek's eyes darkened immediately. Long silence followed. Then quietly he whispered, "There was one woman." Jasur looked surprised. Odebek slowly explained. On the day Lilo disappeared, a woman working near the school claimed she saw a little girl crying beside the road after classes ended early. The child looked lost, frightened, and according to witnesses, the woman took the little girl away, holding her hand. Police searched desperately afterward, but the woman vanished too. No name, no address, nothing. Only one blurry security photograph remained. Old camera, rain covering the image badly. Impossible to identify clearly. Jasur felt chills hearing it, because suddenly Lilo's disappearance no longer sounded like simple tragedy. It sounded terrifyingly real. That evening, after returning home emotionally shaken, Jasur told his grandmother about Odebek accidentally during dinner. At first, she listened quietly, but the moment Jasur mentioned the faded photograph of little Lilo, something strange happened. His grandmother suddenly froze, completely froze, teacup trembling slightly inside her hands now. Jasur immediately noticed. "Grandma?" She slowly looked toward him, pale-faced, then whispered softly, "What did the little girl look like?" Confused, Jasur described the photograph carefully. Tiny braids, balloons, bright smile. And suddenly, his grandmother covered her mouth emotionally because 20 years earlier, she worked as a nurse inside a small countryside clinic outside the city. And one stormy evening, a frightened woman arrived carrying a soaked little girl with tiny braids. The child cried constantly, asking for her father. "Dad will look for me. I need to go home." Those words returned violently inside the old woman's memory now. Jasur stared at his grandmother in disbelief. What happened to the child? His grandmother's eyes filled with tears slowly, then quietly whispered the sentence, changing everything. The woman claimed she was the girl's mother, but something felt wrong. The room became silent.
terribly silent, because suddenly, after 20 years of hopeless waiting, a terrifying possibility appeared. Lilo might not have died at all. She might have been taken alive. Meanwhile, across the city, Odebek still sat alone beside the bus stop, watching headlights pass through rain softly, completely unaware that somewhere nearby, the first real clue about his daughter had finally surfaced after 2 decades of silence. That night, Jasur barely slept. Again and again, his grandmother's words echoed inside his mind. The child kept asking for her father. Every detail matched: the rain, the age, the braids, and most horrifying of all, the timing. Because suddenly, after 20 years, Laylo's disappearance no longer felt like unsolved mystery. It felt like stolen childhood. The next morning, Jasur rushed toward his grandmother again, carrying old notebooks and newspaper articles about missing children. Carefully, the elderly woman tried remembering everything. Slowly, painfully, the frightened woman who brought the little girl called herself Saida, quiet, nervous, always avoiding questions. And according to clinic records, she left the countryside only weeks later with the child, then disappeared completely, no trace afterward. But one detail shook Jasur deeply. His grandmother remembered the little girl crying one night during fever. Half asleep, she repeatedly whispered the same sentence, "My name is Laylo." But every time, the woman angrily corrected her. "No, your name is Medina now." Jasur felt chills run through his body hearing that, because suddenly he realized something devastating. Someone didn't only steal the child, they tried stealing her identity too. Meanwhile, far away in another city, a young woman named Medina lived an ordinary, quiet life, completely unaware of the storm approaching her past. 26 years old, teacher at a small kindergarten, soft voice, gentle smile, the kind of woman children trusted naturally. But deep inside, Medina carried strange emptiness her entire life, missing pieces, questions nobody answered properly. Her mother, Saida, always became angry whenever childhood memories appeared, especially one recurring memory haunting Medina for years. Rain, a bus stop, and a man's voice softly calling, "Laylo." The name felt painfully familiar somehow, yet every time Medina asked about it growing up, Saida reacted violently. "That's not your name. Forget those dreams." So eventually, Medina stopped asking, because children raised around fear learn silence quickly. Still, certain feelings never disappeared completely. Every time she passed bus stops during rainy evenings, sadness touched her chest strangely, unexplainable sadness, as if part of her soul remembered waiting for someone important long ago. One evening after work, Medina accidentally noticed an old missing child article online shared through social media. Father waits 20 years for missing daughter. The photo stopped her breathing instantly. Little girl, tiny braids, balloons, and beneath it, the name, Laylo Odebekova. Medina's hands immediately began trembling violently, because suddenly she recognized the child, not from newspapers, from memories, tiny broken memories buried deep inside her since childhood. And then Another image crashed into her mind suddenly. A warm hand holding hers beside a bus stop, a man kissing her forehead, soft voice saying, "I'll wait here after school." Medina collapsed into the chair, breathing unevenly now, because somewhere deep inside, something terrifying awakened completely. What if her entire life was built on someone else's lie? Meanwhile, across the city, Odebek still waited beside the same bus stop holding Laylo's faded photograph, carefully unaware that the little girl he spent 20 years mourning might finally be remembering her way home. That night, Medina couldn't breathe properly. The article remained open on her phone screen for hours. The missing girl's face, the bus stop, the name Laylo, everything felt terrifyingly familiar because suddenly, childhood memories she buried for years began returning violently. Rain hitting windows, a man lifting her onto his shoulders laughing, warm hands tying tiny braids before school, and one sentence repeating inside her mind over and over. "I'll wait here after school." Medina pressed her hands against her head, trying to stop shaking, because deep down, she already knew the truth before fully admitting it aloud. The next morning, she confronted Saida directly for the first time in years. Their tiny apartment felt unusually silent, heavy silence, dangerous silence. Medina slowly placed the article onto the kitchen table and quietly asked, "Who is Laylo?" Saida immediately froze. Real fear entered her face instantly. Not confusion, fear. Medina noticed immediately. Then softly, through trembling breath, she asked the question destroying both their lives. "Is that me?" Saida's hands began shaking visibly now. For several long seconds, she said nothing, only stared at the article like someone watching buried secrets rise from the dead. Finally, very quietly, she whispered, "I wanted to protect you." Medina stepped backward emotionally, because suddenly that sentence confirmed everything. Tears filled her eyes immediately. "You took me?" Saida instantly started crying too, real, uncontrollable crying. And slowly, after 20 years of lies, the horrifying truth finally emerged. Saida once worked near Laylo's school, poor, lonely, unable to have children herself, and after losing a baby during pregnancy, something inside her broke emotionally. Then came the stormy afternoon, the little lost girl crying beside the road after confusion during school dismissal, and for one terrible, selfish moment, Saida made a monstrous decision. Instead of helping the child return home, she kept her. At first, she convinced herself it was temporary, only until she figured things out. But days became weeks, weeks became years, and eventually, fear trapped them both inside the lie permanently. Medina cried harder hearing it, because suddenly, her entire identity collapsed. Her childhood, her name, her father, everything stolen. Meanwhile, Saida desperately grabbed her hands, crying violently, "But I loved you!" Real pain inside her voice. Because despite the horrifying truth, Saida truly did raise her with care afterward, fed her, protected her, stayed beside her during sickness, loved her in the only broken way she knew. And somehow, that made everything even more emotionally complicated. Medina pulled away, shaking uncontrollably now. "You stole me from my father." The sentence shattered the tiny apartment completely, because for 20 years, one lonely man waited beside a bus stop while his daughter lived another life under a stolen name. Saida collapsed into tears, whispering repeatedly, I was afraid. If I returned you, I would lose the only person who ever called me mom. Those words broke Medina emotionally too, because suddenly she realized something devastating. She was both kidnapped and loved, victim and daughter, and now no truth could exist without destroying someone. That night, Medina sat alone near the city bus stop, staring at passing headlights through tears, and deep inside, one terrifying question finally surfaced completely. After 20 years, how do you return to a father who never stopped waiting for you?
The next morning, rain covered the city softly again, exactly like 20 years earlier. Gray skies, cold wind, wet streets reflecting headlights, and somehow it felt as if time itself remembered. Medina barely slept the entire night. Again and again she replayed the truth inside her mind. Laylo, her real name. Odebek, her real father. And somewhere deep inside, a terrified little girl finally awakened after decades of silence. Meanwhile, inside the tiny apartment, Saida sat near the kitchen crying quietly, because deep down she already knew something heartbreaking. The child she stole was about to return home emotionally forever. Before leaving, Medina slowly stopped near the doorway. Long silence filled the room. Then softly whispered, "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Saida's tears immediately fell harder, because there was no answer beautiful enough for what she had done. Only broken honesty remained now. "I was selfish," tiny trembling whisper, "and then I became afraid of losing you." Medina closed her eyes painfully, because despite everything, part of her still loved the woman who raised her, and that complicated every emotion inside her heart. Without another word, she quietly walked away into the rainy morning. Meanwhile, across the city, Odebek arrived at the bus stop exactly at 8 o'clock again. Same gray coat, same old photograph, same impossible hope. People passed without noticing him. Cars moved through rain. Life continued normally around one lonely father waiting 20 years too long. Then suddenly, a woman stopped several meters away from the bench, breathing unevenly, hands trembling. Medina, or maybe Laylo. For several terrifying seconds, she couldn't move closer, because suddenly the weight of 20 lost years crushed her chest completely. How do you speak to a father whose entire life froze waiting for you? Meanwhile, Odebek quietly looked up from the faded photograph and instantly froze, because standing near the road was a young woman with familiar eyes, his eyes. And suddenly, something inside his soul recognized her before logic could. The world around them disappeared completely. No traffic, no rain, only silence between father and daughter, separated by 20 stolen years. Medina slowly stepped closer now, tears already falling uncontrollably, and softly, through shaking breath, she whispered the word Odebek dreamed of hearing every day. "Dad." The photograph immediately slipped from Odebek's trembling hands. His entire body shook violently now, because suddenly the impossible stood alive in front of him. Not dream, not hallucination. His daughter, alive, older, broken, but alive. Odebek slowly stood from the bench, unable to breathe properly, then whispered weakly, "Laylo?" The moment she nodded, he completely collapsed emotionally. Real, uncontrollable crying, the kind arriving after years of buried grief finally explode all at once. Odebek rushed toward her carefully, like someone terrified she might disappear again, then held her tightly beneath the rain, desperately, as if trying to recover 20 lost years inside one embrace. Meanwhile, Medina cried against his shoulder like a little girl again,
because deep down, part of her never stopped searching for this feeling either. My little girl. Odebek repeated the words again and again through tears. My little girl. People passing nearby slowly stopped watching emotionally, because suddenly even strangers understood something beautiful and heartbreaking was happening. Odebek touched her face carefully, still unable to believe, then softly whispered, I waited for you every day. Medina immediately broke down harder hearing that, because somewhere deep inside, she always feared maybe he forgot her eventually. But he never did. Not once. And suddenly, 20 years of loneliness crashed apart beneath one rainy reunion beside the same bus stop where a little girl once disappeared. For hours after the reunion, Odebek refused letting Lalo leave his sight, as if 20 years taught him disappearance can happen suddenly. They sat together inside a tiny cafe near the bus stop while rain continued falling outside softly. Neither knew where to begin, because how do you fit 20 stolen years into one conversation? Odebek kept staring at her face emotionally, every smile, every movement, trying to memorize the daughter time almost erased from his life. Meanwhile, Lalo felt emotionally overwhelmed because sitting across from him now, she finally understood something devastating. This man never stopped loving her. Not once. Not during 20 lonely years. And suddenly, every birthday he missed hurt differently now. Not because he abandoned her willingly, because someone stole both of them from each other. At one point, Odebek softly asked, Did she hurt you? Lalo immediately understood who he meant, Saida. Long silence followed. Then, quietly, she answered honestly, No. Pause. She lied to me, but she also raised me. Those words complicated everything instantly, because suddenly, this story no longer contained simple monsters and heroes, only broken humans carrying terrible choices. Meanwhile, across the city, Saida sat alone inside the dark apartment, unable to stop crying. Because deep down, she knew the moment Lalo called another man Dad again, she lost her forever emotionally. And strangely, that pain felt unbearable, not because she regretted loving Lalo, because now she finally understood true love cannot be built from stolen lives. Late that evening, someone knocked softly at her apartment door. Saida immediately froze, because somehow she already knew who stood outside. Slowly, she opened the door, and there he was, Odebek, standing silently beneath hallway lights, 20 years of grief visible across his tired face. For several long seconds, neither spoke, because no words existed large enough for this moment. Finally, Saida whispered weakly, I'm sorry. Odebek stared at her silently, and somehow that silence hurt worse than shouting could. Then softly, through trembling breath, he asked the question haunting him for 20 years. Did she cry for me? Saida immediately began sobbing uncontrollably, because suddenly she remembered fever nights, bus stop nightmares, tiny Lalo asking, When will Dad come? And horrifyingly, Saida realized she spent years destroying a child's connection to the person who loved her most. Yes, she whispered brokenly, every night at first. Those words shattered Odebek completely. He turned away briefly, trying to control tears, but grief that deep cannot stay hidden. Then, finally, he looked toward Saida again, eyes full of devastation now. She thought I stopped loving her. The sentence destroyed the apartment emotionally, because suddenly, Saida fully understood the real damage she caused, not only kidnapping a child, breaking the trust between father and daughter for 20 years. Meanwhile, Lalo arrived quietly behind Odebek moments later, and instantly froze seeing both people standing face to face. The father who lost her, the woman who raised her. Two broken worlds colliding. Saida slowly looked toward Lalo through tears, then whispered shakily, "I know you hate me now." Lalo's eyes immediately filled again, because deep down, that was the cruelest part. She didn't hate Saida completely, and that itself felt emotionally confusing. "You stole my life," Lalo whispered painfully. Saida nodded silently, accepting it. Then, quietly, through tears, she said the sentence breaking everyone emotionally. "But loving you was the only real thing I ever did." Silence crushed the room afterward, because despite the unforgivable crime, the love somehow became real too. And suddenly, everyone inside that apartment understood something devastating. Sometimes, the most painful stories contain no fully evil people, only lonely, broken humans making terrible choices that destroy innocent lives forever. After the confrontation, Lalo's world completely shattered emotionally, because suddenly, she no longer knew where home truly existed. With the father who spent 20 years waiting beside a bus stop, or with the woman who stole her, but also raised her. Every answer hurt someone, and that became unbearable. The next few days felt like emotional drowning. Otebek wanted to spend every possible second beside her now. Breakfast together, walking through old neighborhoods, showing her childhood photographs he protected for 20 years. Tiny shoes, drawings, birthday cards, memories frozen in time, waiting for a daughter who never returned. Meanwhile, Lalo cried almost every night afterward, because deep down, she realized something devastating. While her father's life stopped the day she disappeared, hers continued under another name. And now, both identities lived painfully inside her. One evening, Otebek carefully brought out an old, dusty box from the closet. Inside, dozens of unopened birthday gifts waited, one for every year Layla was missing. Tiny dolls, books, scarves, even adult gifts as she grew older, still wrapped carefully, still waiting. Lalo immediately covered her mouth, crying uncontrollably, because suddenly she understood something heartbreaking. Her father's life stopped the day she disappeared, and her father spent 20 years preparing gifts for a daughter he prayed might return someday. Otebek softly smiled through tears. "I didn't know your size anymore." Small, sad laugh. So choosing clothes became difficult. That sentence completely destroyed Lalo emotionally, because somewhere inside the city, while she lived another life, her father kept imagining her growing older every single year alone. Meanwhile, Saida stayed isolated inside the apartment afterward. No television, no music, only silence. Because deep down, she already understood the truth. Even if Lalo forgave her someday, nothing could erase what she stole. One rainy afternoon, Lalo finally visited Saida again. The apartment felt painfully familiar. Same kitchen smells, same old furniture, same woman who tucked her into bed during childhood fevers. And suddenly, Lalo emotionally collapsed inside herself again, because despite the lies, part of her childhood there still felt real. Saida looked terrified seeing her enter, as if expecting hatred or goodbye forever. Instead, Lalo quietly sat beside her. Long silence filled the room softly. Then finally, through tears, Laylo whispered, "I don't know what to call you anymore." That sentence shattered Saida completely because suddenly she realized the cruelest punishment already arrived. The child who once called her mom naturally now no longer knew who she truly was emotionally. Saida cried silently, then whispered honestly, "You don't owe me anything." Laylo instantly looked toward her painfully because deep down, that made everything even harder. If Saida acted cruel, hate would feel easier, but broken regret complicated forgiveness. Then suddenly, Laylo softly asked the question haunting her most. "Did you ever think about taking me back?" Saida closed her eyes immediately, tears falling harder now. Every day, real pain inside her voice. But the longer I waited, the more terrified I became of losing you. Laylo lowered her head, crying again, because suddenly she understood something tragic. Fear and selfish love destroyed 3 lives simultaneously. That night, Laylo stood alone near the old bus stop, staring at city lights quietly. And for the first time since learning the truth, she finally admitted something terrifying to herself. She wasn't only mourning lost years, she was mourning 2 different childhoods at the same time. The one stolen from her, and the one built from lies afterward.
Winter arrived early that year. Cold wind moved through empty streets, and once again, snow slowly began covering the old bus stop where everything started. But now, for the first time in 20 years, Otebek no longer waited there alone. Laylo sat beside him quietly beneath the small shelter, hands wrapped around warm tea, both staring at passing buses silently, and somehow, the place no longer felt only painful. Now it carried reunion too. One evening, while snow fell softly around them, Laylo finally asked the question living inside her heart for weeks. "Why did you keep coming back here every day?" Otebek smiled faintly, tired smile, the kind built from years of grief, then softly answered, "Because this was the last place you promised to return." Laylo instantly looked down emotionally, because suddenly, tiny childhood memories returned again. Little hands, school bag, kissing his cheek before boarding the bus, and her tiny voice saying, "I'll come back fast, Dad." Tears filled her eyes immediately. Otebek continued quietly. "Everyone told me to move on eventually. Police, neighbors, friends." Pause. "But fathers don't stop waiting for daughters they love." Those words completely shattered Laylo emotionally, because deep down, part of her always feared maybe he forgot her after enough years passed. But he never did. Not once. Not even for a single day. Snow continued falling softly around them. Then suddenly, Otebek carefully reached inside his coat pocket and removed something small, an old faded pink hair ribbon. Laylo immediately froze because somehow she recognized it instantly. Otebek smiled sadly through tears. "You lost it here the week before you disappeared." Laylo carefully took the ribbon with trembling fingers, and suddenly a memory hit her completely. Tiny 6-year-old Laylo crying because she lost her favorite ribbon near the bus stop. Otebek kneeling beside her, laughing softly while promising, "I'll keep looking until we find it." Laylo immediately began crying uncontrollably now, because suddenly she realized something devastatingly beautiful. Her father spent 20 years emotionally keeping that promise too.
still searching for what he lost, still refusing to give up. Then softly, through shaking breath, Laylo whispered, "Did you ever hate me for not finding my way back?" Otebek instantly looked horrified hearing that. "No!" Immediate answer, strong answer. Then gently, he held her freezing hands carefully. "You were a child." Silence. Then quietly added the sentence, completely breaking her heart. "The only person I blamed was myself for not protecting you." Laylo cried harder hearing that, because abandoned children often secretly blame themselves for tragedies adults created. And finally, after 20 years, her father removed that burden from her heart completely. Long silence followed afterward, peaceful silence this time. Then Otebek softly looked toward the snowy road and whispered, "You know, I used to imagine this moment every day." Laylo smiled sadly through tears. "Really?" Otebek nodded slowly. "But in my dreams, you always stayed little." That sentence emotionally crushed Laylo again, because suddenly she realized something painful. Her father's memories froze her forever at 6 years old. Then quietly, Otebek turned toward her fully, eyes full of love, and softly made one final promise beside the same bus stop where he lost her decades earlier. "No matter how much time we lost, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make sure you never feel lost again." Laylo immediately hugged him tightly, crying into his shoulder. And beneath falling snow, father and daughter held each other beside the old bus stop, finally no longer separated by silence. Spring arrived quietly after the longest winter of Otebek. Flowers slowly returned to the city. Warm sunlight touched the old bus stop again, and for the first time in 20 years, Otebek no longer came there carrying only grief. Now, Laylo sometimes sat beside him, laughing softly while sharing tea. People passing nearby smiled seeing them together. The lonely old man at the bus stop was lonely no more. Meanwhile, Laylo slowly rebuilt her identity piece by piece. Not Medina, not fully the 6-year-old Laylo frozen inside memories either. Something new, a woman carrying 2 painful lives inside one heart. And somehow, Otebek loved every version of her anyway. One evening, Laylo finally brought Otebek to visit her kindergarten where she worked. Tiny children immediately surrounded him, laughing loudly. Questions everywhere. "Are you her grandpa? Why do you cry so much?" The last question made everyone laugh softly through tears, because Otebek truly cried often now, not from grief anymore, from relief. At one point, Laylo watched him helping little children draw pictures quietly, gentle, patient, warm, and suddenly a painful thought touched her chest. This was the father she lost 20 years with, the man who would have loved her endlessly if life had not been stolen from them. That realization still hurt deeply, but now love existed beside the pain too. Meanwhile, Saida quietly prepared to leave the city, not because anyone forced her, because deep down, she believed Laylo deserved a life free of confusion now. Before leaving, she asked to meet Otebek one final time. The meeting happened beside the same old bus stop, rain falling softly again, almost like life closing a circle. Saida stood silently for several seconds before speaking, then softly whispered, "I can never undo what I did." Otebek looked toward the empty road quietly. "No." Simple answer. painfully true answer. Saida's tears fell immediately. Then, through shaken breath, she asked the question carrying 20 years of guilt. "Can you ever forgive me?" Long silence followed, only rain touching the shelter roof softly. Finally, Otebek answered honestly, "I don't know." Saida lowered her eyes painfully, but then Otebek quietly added, "Because part of me hates what you stole, and another part is grateful my daughter survived." Those words shattered Saida emotionally, because suddenly she understood forgiveness sometimes arrives mixed with pain forever. Before leaving, Saida softly whispered, "I really did love her." Otebek nodded slowly. "I know." And somehow that made the goodbye even sadder. Months later, life slowly became peaceful. Not perfect, never fully healed, but peaceful. One warm summer morning, Lalo arrived at the bus stop carrying breakfast happily, but immediately froze. Otebek sat quietly on the bench, unusually still, sunlight touching his gray coat softly, tiny smile across his face, and beside him, Lalo's faded childhood photograph rested carefully in his hands. For one terrifying second, her heart stopped. "Dad?" No answer. Lalo rushed toward him in panic, then suddenly realized something heartbreaking. Otebek was gone, peacefully, quietly, as if after 20 years of waiting, his tired heart finally allowed itself to rest once he found his daughter again. Lalo collapsed beside him, crying uncontrollably, holding his hand tightly, because suddenly she understood something devastating. Her father waited half his life for this reunion, only to leave shortly after finally getting it. But then, through endless tears, Lalo noticed something folded carefully inside his coat pocket, a small handwritten note. Hands trembling, she slowly opened it and immediately broke down, crying harder. The note said, "My little Lalo, if you are reading this, then I finally kept my promise. I waited for you, and you came home." Tears blurred the page completely now. Still, Lalo forced herself to continue reading. "You were never lost to me, not for one single day. And wherever I go next, I will still recognize you as my daughter first." The letter slipped from Lalo's hands as she cried against her father's shoulder beside the same bus stop where he spent 20 years waiting for impossible hope. And suddenly, the place no longer felt tragic anymore, because now it became proof of something beautiful. Real love waits, even through grief, even through time, even through impossible years. Some parents never stop loving their children, even after years, even after silence, even after the whole world tells them to give up hope. And sometimes, the people we think are strange or broken are only carrying heartbreak too heavy for one human heart. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe, because some stories are not only emotional, they remind us that real love never truly stops waiting.